Hello, listeners. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Joshua Medcalf, who is a renowned author. You probably know him from some of his books, such as Chop Wood, Carry Water, Pound the Stone, Burn Your Goals, Hustle, and many others. He has a background in sports psychology and a passion for coaching. He's a speaker and thought leader in the realm of personal development and leadership. He's also the founder of Train to Be Clutch, a consultancy dedicated to helping individuals and organizations reach their highest potential. In this episode, we dive into his journey and his stories, tend to hint at some of his philosophies. And ultimately, this is just a pretty thought-provoking episode that I hope you enjoy as much as I did.
Welcome to the Live for Yourself Revolution, where our mission is to highlight stories of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who are truly living for themselves. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Ritter, leadership and career coach focused on guiding you toward a career and life you can love. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Joshua, thank you so much for joining us. And I have to share with you something because some people know this about me, some people don't. But I was a D1 soccer player, and I specifically remember the moment where I realized that my mind was at the core of my performance. And I was kind of just read this book called The Mind Gym. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
Great book.
Yeah, it was my Bible at the time. And we were all circled up, and the coach was just screaming at us. He was berating us. We all played pretty poorly that day. And I, for some reason, I must have hit a point in my learning about mental performance that I decided to speak up. And I was like, Coach, it's my head. My head's getting in the way. I don't know what's happening. And just let that kind of sit in the air. And the coach, no joke, without even the drop of, it was just in an instant, goes, I'm not your effing therapist. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, I got to figure this out because he's not going to help me. Could have used you then.
Yeah, unfortunately, there were a lot of, and still are a lot of people in positions of leadership that I don't think recognize that their job as a coach, as a leader, as a person of influence who typically is, 15, 20, 30, 40 years older, that their job is not to be a therapist, but their job is to be a coach. And I hope that from some of the work you've done, from a lot of the work I've done, that we're trying to help raise the level of consciousness of those people in those positions, because they may not need to be a therapist, but some of them may need to play some sort of a role that's similar, and berating and degrading and speaking in some of the ways in which they do it may be good from a, okay, well, here's a challenge to overcome perspective, but it's definitely not the most beneficial type of coaching, and it's definitely not being a transformational coach or leader. So I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but I also think it sounds like you've probably taken that experience and used it as an opportunity to say, what do I wish that I had in that moment? Because obviously this person somewhat failed in their responsibilities, and maybe we can equip the next generation of people in those positions to meet the moment.
Mm-hmm. That's the goal. It did very much become a compass and a guiding light. Through our voids come our values. And I think when we struggle with something, we tend to make it important to us. And I know you had some struggles as well. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your kind of journey to where you are today. If you can, you got a lot of content to go for it with, but anything you'd like to share with our audience?
Sure. I mean, I'll try and do a quick synopsis of my story. I grew up in the Midwest. Sports were the thing that I loved from childhood. I realized freshman year in high school that soccer was probably going to take me the furthest, so I kind of dedicated most of my time to that, stopped playing everything else, ended up getting a partial 10% scholarship to play at Vanderbilt. I had grown up dirt poor, so my dad grew up in a trailer park, had to duct tape his trailer together, very violent, single-parent home, very, very violent, just situation similar to Eminem, kind of having to fight his way across the railroad tracks every day. He didn't really know how to be a great dad, but he ended up somehow becoming a doctor. And so went from being dirt poor, dreaming about Happy Meals when I was 6, 7, 8, to at 11, 12 years old, he finally got his practice started in Oklahoma. And then by the time I got that 10% scholarship, my parents were barely, but able to afford the rest of that tuition for me to attend Vanderbilt, play soccer there. Was a head case, got kicked off the team 5 times in 2.5 years. After Christmas of my junior year, they ended up cutting our soccer program. I end up just thinking I'm retiring and being done, go out for the club team that next fall, get cut from the club team. Then on my birthday, Joe Germanese, who had transferred to Duke when the program got cut, he called and said, "Hey, are you interested in playing soccer at Duke?" And I was like, I think a better question is the number 1 team in the country interested in a guy who got kicked off the team 5 times in 2.5 years, who had mediocre statistics, who just got cut from the club team? And he was like, yeah, I kind of vouched for you. We had a guy that got injured. We have some money available. So by the grace of God, I end up getting a full ride scholarship to play on the number 1 team in the country. Then I get there, and now I'm playing with and against the best players in the country. I'm the last pick on the team when we play pickup games, and I'm taking this sports psychology class with Dr. Greg Dale. He asked us one day, how much of sports do you guys think are mental? Most of the people in the class are, athletes at Duke, and people are going around the room saying crazy things, 60, 70, 80, 90%. And that was really hard for me. At 32, I found out I was on the autism spectrum, so I process a lot of things literally. And when people are saying this, it was like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up, because if sports are 70, 80, 90% mental, which they probably are, then why have we spent 100% of our time on physical training? Why has nobody up to this point taught me how to do mental training? And so, but I was the last pick on the team when we played pickup games. So I attempted to do some of the stuff that I thought was crazy, but that he was teaching us. And in a very short period of time, I went from being the last pick on the team to the Duke Student Athlete of the Week, the ACC Player of the Week, to finishing second in points on that team, to Mike Grella, who would go on to open his career at Leeds United with a hat trick. And then I got even more frustrated, because I was like, we'd been exposed to Mind Gym and things like that, but it was like, why isn't this taught all over? Why didn't I learn this whenever I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old? Why did I have to get to Duke to learn this? And so I skipped scholarships to law school. I moved across the country into a homeless shelter and lived and served in a homeless shelter in downtown Los Angeles for 7 or 8 months. Moved from there into the closet of a gym in Whittier. Was there for 9 months. Started going into the toughest housing project in the country down in Watts and Imperial Courts to train the athletes there for 3 years. My mom moved out. I lived with her for 5 years as I would go on to create the first mental training apps in the world for basketball, soccer, and golf. And really just tried to create, teach, make, equip people, coaches, teachers, leaders, athletes with the tools and things that I wish I had had whenever I was growing up. And so now I've published 9 books, one of which, so funny that you said Mind Gym was so important to you. Whenever when was it? 14 or 15, IMG Academy in Bradenton asked me to head up mental conditioning and leadership. And if I'd taken that position, they would have owned my work product. And so I knew that Mind Gym was really the only book out there. And quite frankly, I felt that it was lacking in many ways, even though it was good. It focused on a lot of baseball stories. It wasn't, I just felt like there was a lot of holes in it. And so I really tried to set out to create something that I thought could be closer to the go-to book in sports psychology. I didn't really leave bed for about at least 30 days, but maybe closer to 60, and ended up writing Chop Wood, Carry Water and my memoir, Hustle. And again, most of that was just an attempt to get as much down on paper that I was already teaching out in the world, but so that I would have authorship of that and wouldn't go to a big conglomerate and basically give away my intellectual property. Had no clue that Chop Wood would go viral, that it would become arguably, if not top 3 go-to books in sports psychology. And then I just, from there, kept trying to create. I think that was the 3rd and 4th book that I'd published, but then would just, again, keep trying to follow that same kind of mantra and ethos of what do I wish I would have known? What do I wish my teachers, coaches would have known, and try and create those tools for people.
Sure. And thank you for creating the tools that you have. You know, Mind Gym was the Bible because it was the only book I could find. And no one seemed, and no one was talking about it. And I knew, by the way, I remember going onto the field one day, and this is like, and by the way, last picked as well, like during soccer hazing, they nicknamed me Pele, because they thought I was the worst player on the team. And that kind of stuff really, it's like, wow, we kind of cruel, even though we think we're funny. But yeah, I remember one game I jumped on the field and I was in flow. My mind was off and I just crushed everybody. And it was like this insight into what was possible. Now, that it was a really good learning opportunity. I've taken all these lessons and I've built now a business and an approach to life that I think I'm very lucky to be able to have it and be able to teach people what I teach. But more people need it. And when you look back on your story, I know you probably share it a lot. What part of your story gives you the most energy?
I think it's been different at different times. I think that, a very pivotal moment for me was running into Ants Endurance, keeping with the soccer theme. I was out in, I think it was St. Louis, that they had the soccer convention. And this is before Chop Wood, Carry Water. This is before I'd written anything. This is when I was really just starting. I'd spent about 2 years studying, reading on my own for 12 to 15 hours a day. Dr. Greg Dale had been in LA one time recently around this time, and he told me, Joshua, I really think you need to go get your PhD or at least your master's in sports psychology. And I didn't love that path for me, because I had looked at him and I felt like he's not one of us. And I don't know, I was just a little bit jaded towards that. And so I wanted to be a practitioner. And so I was trying to find my footing, and I was, training the athletes in Watts, and I was running basically a nonprofit that I called Dream Sports Academy. And there was a guy who ironically had Pele in his house. It was Skip Grossman, who his son had played with me at Duke, and we'd become really close. And he had given me, I think it was like $10,000, and he matched the next 10 or 15 that I raised for the nonprofit. And he told me, I think you should go to this soccer convention, and I think it would be helpful, and you'll meet some people and open some doors. But the whole time I was there, I just really felt like a fake and a fraud because I didn't have, cool marketing materials. I didn't have a PhD or, anything behind my name. I had really just been trying to share my story and some of the stuff that had been helpful. And I'd seen it be helpful with some athletes, but being on that big stage, it just kind of felt like, nobody was that interested. And then and it was cold, it was icy that year. And I had this little, smart card that I had rented, and I was staying at the Motel 6, and I just felt like a fraud and a phony. But I'd been with John Rennie, who was my coach at Duke, earlier in the day, and a guy had come up and invited him to this, little party ceremony thing that they were doing. And he kind of looked at me and he sized me up and he was kind of like, you could come too. And he handed me an invite. And so just everything inside of me felt like I was just a fake and a fraud, and I didn't even want to go. But then I finally talked myself into going, and I get on the elevator. I think it was at the Marriott or something like that after I'd driven down there, and the elevator's packed. And the person that I like stared into his eyes when I walked in, I was pretty sure that it was Anson Dorrance, who, arguably the greatest coach of all time, women's soccer coach at North Carolina, kind of founded and created women's college soccer, and had won 20 national championships at the time out of like 34 that had ever taken place. And so we get off the elevator, everybody had turned right, he and I turned left. And my mom always kind of said that I was optimistically delusional. And I said to him, who works with your girls on sports psychology? And in a way that only Anson and very few others could do, he kind of looked at me and said, I do. I can read and write. And, I had a lot of respect for him and even his answer because, if I'd won 20 national championships, I'd feel very confident and have a lot of conviction that I knew what I was doing when it came to sports psychology. But at that time I'd been studying and training and, almost like I was in med school. And so I said, well, do you know who Barbara Fredrickson is? And he said, no, why should I? And I spit off very quickly, kind of like an auctioneer, about the difference in your positivity ratios, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1. And afterwards he said, could you write that down for me? You might have just made my trip worthwhile. And I thought I was being slick, and I got his email and I sent it to him. And then at the end, I put this little note of, I'd love to come in and talk to your team. I have a lot more stuff like this that I can share. And so he invites me out to work with them a couple of months later. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I started doing some research on him, and then afterwards found out that I was the second outsider that he'd ever invited to work with him on mental training. And I went in there and I studied like crazy, and I knocked that workshop out of the park. There was a girl that had told me before the workshop started how hungry she was. And I knew that the workshop was going to last like 2.5 hours. And so I was really nervous, and she was the one who kind of helped set everything up. And afterwards I was like, oh, Maddie, I'm so sorry. I know that you were hungry. And she kind of it was almost like she snapped out of a trance, and she was like, oh, I forgot that I was hungry. And then he would go on to say some really incredible things about me. Some of the girls would, saying they need to be at the national level. And it really felt like a lot of the sacrifice and kind of just taking the road less traveled and doing stuff that everybody had kind of said was crazy. It felt like maybe I'm on to something. Maybe this is going to work out in a way that was hard to articulate. I went to Vanderbilt, I went to Duke. A lot of my friends to this day, my roommate from college runs IMG Academy now. He's done incredible things. I've got a lot of my friends that do really, really big things in the world, and they thought that I was crazy, like legitimately crazy. And so that was really the thing that I saw put wind in my sails and give me energy, was that, you know what, maybe this isn't the path for everyone, but you really could be onto something here that could impact a lot of people's lives. Because if you can go into North Carolina and impact these girls the way that you did, maybe this is really going to work.
What a powerful story. You went from player to lawyer to homeless shelter to closet.
Skip the lawyer,
gym.
but
Okay, skip. It was an idea, right? Idea wasn't what you did. To being in the elevator, right? Not feeling incredibly confident about yourself, working on mental toughness, and then being able to have that conversation and make that proposition, and then go and take the shot and to step into the opportunity and make it into something that really mattered.
Yeah, I felt very grateful in terms of a lot of the timing of a lot of stuff. It's tricky. I think that there's so much of life that comes down to timing. And yes, it's about, seizing moments and taking advantage of moments when they come. But a lot of times, it really is just the timing of things. And I do feel that as tough as it was for people like you and I think that sometimes the timing also worked out, because it was like, wow, there really is this huge hole that's not being filled. And you've got people like the guy that was your coach saying what he said to you that is just wild to me and to you now. But back then that was kind of the norm. And so it kind of opened an opportunity for us to say, you know what, this isn't, this may be the way things are now, but this isn't the way that things should be or could be. And we see a lot of room for growth here. And so I'm grateful that we were able to, fill those voids.
Yeah. And so when you think about the work environment now, the leaders that you work with, what are some of the changes that you see that lead to like some of the impact that is so needed in our professional world?
Good question. I think it depends on individual context. I think context matters a lot. I think that I try and write stories in a way that are very generic, and that's not on accident. I don't try and write too much that's prescriptive, because I think that it's really important to understand, what your individual kind of operating system is. You need to know whether you're a grinder, whether you're soft, whether you're too tough, whether you're a people person, whether you struggle with people, those things. And then you really need to kind of move almost in a different direction, oftentimes individually. So one of the challenges I have is that sometimes people will like read something and they'll be like, oh, well, you said this here. And it's like, yeah. And in a general sense that works. But in a specific individualized case, it could be radically different. I don't have a program that I walk clients through. And it annoys a lot of people when they come to me and ask for coaching, because they want to know, like, what are we going to work on? And I'm like, well, I don't know what we're going to work on. That's going to come up as we work together. Like, I have to get to know you. I have to get to know your strengths, weaknesses, and more of who you are, so that I can give you what I believe to be more prescriptive one-on-one wisdom for your specific life. I may tell two different clients to do exact opposite things based off of who they are and their uniqueness and how they move through the world and their experiences. And they may need something that's very different one to another. And so, I try and be careful in answering these types of questions, because my gut is, well, we've almost moved too far in the opposite direction today, is what I would say. That, we've gotten too soft. We've gone from way too hard and coaches communicating the way that your coach communicated with you. And now we act too much like therapists, and we're too much in the participation trophy and everybody is a winner, and, let's avoid hard things at all costs. But, that's not true for everyone, and that's not true in every case. And so I think it all, it comes down to different individuals and individual experiences. And, it's still a big world, and everybody has grown up typically or lived in and have very different lived experiences.
It really does matter. Like, who are you? What are you trying to achieve? What's your current situation? Like, very much contextual to the individual that's in front of you. But I do really like that you said about the kind of going into the too soft category, because, well, we can't. Like, do you live at the extremes, or do you find the balance? Do you have that level of awareness to do it? I think is an important question to pose to the audience too that might be listening.
I
think build that awareness.
I think it's a great question. I think that, one thing we don't like to do, and it's become even easier in our world today, whether it's based off of your political orientation, or whether it's based off of your sexual orientation, or whether it's based off of lots of different factors, it's very easy today to find silos and live in silos and believe kind of what you want to believe and block off everything else that's contrary to that opinion. It's tough in a social media world to follow enough people from different perspectives to get different inputs and to challenge assumptions. Even, things that are happening at the college and Ivy League level of trying to shield young people from thoughts and ideas. I think that's kind of crazy. I think that, we want to be exposed to as much as possible and then learn how to think through those things. And I think that we need to expose ourselves to people. I'm involved in, behind the scenes in a decent number of high level athletics. And, I think one of the biggest dangers today for, let's call them superstars that are really young, is that nobody in their world tells them the truth. Everybody is afraid to tell them the truth, because if they tell them the truth, it may jeopardize their livelihood. And we need people around us that are willing to, in love, and there's ways of doing it that's, beneficial and constructive and not derogatory and demeaning, but that's truthful. And if you're never told the truth, and if you're shielded from the truth, then it's going to be really hard to grow and evolve and become and tap into your fullest potential. And so I think that, you've got to really seek that out. The easiest one is politically. And, if you only watch a certain channel, or if you only listen to a certain figure or certain types of figures, you're going to believe certain things about the world. And it's really, you have to work hard to expose yourself to many different perspectives. And I think, in a conversation with a client today, one of the things I was saying is a few years ago, I was working with a program, and I don't want to reveal too much, but, it had to do with the time whenever people were kneeling and not, standing for the national anthem and things like that. And I had worked with a program, and very, very high profile program, and some crazy stuff happened. And a couple days later, a coach called and was like, hey, what do I do? And I said, I think what would be really helpful is if we, call the chief of police and have him bring 4 or 5 of his deputies and get your team together and go break bread and take turns sharing perspectives. Have your guys talk about what it was like growing up where they grew up and their interactions with law enforcement. And then you have you and your deputies share what some of your daily encounters are like, and maybe do some ride-alongs with them. And let's really try and sit down and listen and have empathy and try and listen to understand and learn about what other people are going through. Because if you're not careful, it's really easy to get caught up and suctioned into these silos. And a lot of the people that run these technology companies have a vested interest in telling you what you want to hear and showing you what you want to see from what you've already shown that you like, because that keeps you coming back. And so I think that it's really important to try and build out intentionally. And so much of what it takes in the world today, I believe, is a lot of intentionality around surrounding yourself with books, with people, with ideas, with social media figures, with political figures that think differently than what you think you believe about certain things, or else you'll very quickly fall into a silo and you'll believe things about yourself that are probably what you want to believe, but that probably are pretty detached from reality.
Right. As you were talking, I had a couple thoughts. I'm just going to share them. I want to hear your reflection. So I have enough faith in my values to listen to differing opinions. I have enough faith in this relationship to tell the truth. And then the question, like, how do you know when you've learned enough? Or how do you know when you're in a silo?
I think one of the fastest ways to know whether you're in a silo is how often people disagree with you and how often you get excited hearing what people are telling you. I know that I'm hanging out in the wrong spaces if I hear and see what I want to see and hear most of the time, and that I don't hear and see things that make me uncomfortable. Because the world in a totality and in a totalitarian sense of the entire world is very uncomfortable. And if all I'm hearing and seeing is things that I agree with and that make me comfortable with what I'm hearing and seeing, I'm probably in the wrong spaces. If everything I listen to and hear confirms what I believe about my philosophical, political, theological, and even my sense of self, of who I am, I'm probably not in the spaces that I need to be in. Because it's just the same thing with, like, working out or, growing in any way. If you're really growing, it's going to be uncomfortable. It involves pain. It involves uncomfortability. It involves discomfort. And so too often we find ourselves in spaces and places that only confirm our biases, and instead of challenge them and helping us to see things from alternative perspectives.
That's a powerful question to reflect on. Like, how many times have I been uncomfortable this week? Not just in training, but in what I'm reading, the words that I'm hearing, just that level of intentionality, it just makes sense that growth comes from it, just like lifting a heavy weight or running that extra 20 feet to the finish line.
Exactly. I mean, I think how often when you open your social media, do you see and hear stuff that you want to see and hear? Or how often do you open it and go, no, I do not want to see or hear or read that. That really makes me uncomfortable. And I might think that that person is an idiot or misinformed. Because if you don't, then you're probably living in a silo where people are just telling you what you want to see and hear. And quite frankly, they're probably telling you and showing you things that they're really profiting from.
Mm-hmm. So we might as well figure out a way to profit from that information if possible, and let's get uncomfortable. And if our listeners want to get uncomfortable with maybe some of your content, I know they can go to t2bc.com, find out about your books, your speaking, mentorship. There's a variety of different aspects from what you're putting out in the world. But are there any other areas that we want to direct our audience to?
I don't even spend a lot of time. I'm probably on the opposite end of that. I should do a better job of caring or trying to build out those tools. But yeah, I mean, I'm on most social media platforms. I should probably be more active. The fun one that I have coming up that I've spent a lot of time on over the last 2.5 years is writing the sequel to Chop Wood, Carry Water. I've never written a sequel, and very close to having Finish Empty. What does it look like to live a truly successful life from a deathbed perspective? The sequel to Chop Wood, Carry Water finished. Hopefully it'll be, available on Amazon and other outlets in the next 6 months. But even along that line, people ask me all the time whether I listen to podcasts, and I do a fair amount of podcasts on this end, but I've maybe only listened to 3 or 4 podcasts in my life. And I really believe in books. And one of the reasons why I believe in books as strongly as I do as a medium is because books, when you create them, you know that they're going to have to stand the test of time, and that they're going to be around for, as long as the printing press has been out. Books continue to be out there. And when you think about a book, and when you're creating a book, you know that you have that in mind. And it's very different than being on a podcast and just speaking whatever is at top of mind. It's what's going to stand the test of time. And so that's where I tend to go for wisdom more often than not. And it's where I've tried to direct a lot of my energy in terms of creation into is that. And it's scary with AI and with technology, and where is the world going to be in 5, 10, 20, 50 years. But books to date are one of the things that, as the world has evolved, even in the pandemic, it was fascinating because my book sales dropped by like 30% at one point, and they had been and are very, very solid and consistent in ways that are almost it's very confusing to me and other people, to the point where people think that I'm lying when I tell them how consistent my book sales are, because they're self-published and I don't spend money on marketing. But during there was about a year to maybe 18 months in the pandemic where they significantly dropped. And a lot of that, I believe, had to do with we needed quick stimulation, and our brains were rewired a lot by Netflix and Instagram, and we were kind of consumed by instant, quick dopamine hits. And maybe we needed some of that because of how crazy the world was at that time. But even getting through the other side of that, the book sales have kind of come back and normalized again. And so I just think that it'll be fascinating to see what happens with AI and technology over the next 5-20 years. But books have seemingly withstood the test of time in ways that other things have not. And so that's where I try and consume the most. And on the flip side, put the most energy in terms of creation into.
That's a beautiful point. And I mean, I can say too, I've guested on hundreds of podcasts and half of them don't exist anymore. So
there you go.
Yeah. Books are still there. You have created some incredible evergreen stands the test of time content that I enjoy, that I know our audience has or will enjoy. And I can't wait for that sequel. So thank you, Joshua.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
You've been part of the Live for Yourself revolution. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share with a friend and spread the good word. Till next time, keep on living for yourself.